Mary just sitting there. Perhaps as you sat waiting this morning, just sitting. Their hopes and expectations ripped to shreds. Their plans for the future dashed. And as we sang of the old rugged cross, it was not for them a symbol of hope, but a cruel end for a dream that had just begun to become reality. Joseph of Arimathea comes and he takes Jesus' body and he buries Jesus in his new tomb. And then he went away, leaving Jesus in that place. But Mary and the other Mary just sit there. They just sit there in a moment of deep despair, of a moment of not knowing what happens next. We're not told how long they sat there. Where do you most feel the death of Jesus and find yourself sitting opposite the tomb? What are those things in your life that cause confusion and uncertainty? Perhaps you are facing those moments even now, unsure of what the future will hold. Perhaps dealing with circumstances that seem to overwhelm. What do you do when hope is dead? In these moments where we just seem to come to the end of ourselves and we don't know what to do, when we find ourselves just sitting there, sometimes we will ourselves to get up and try and fix the situation. What is there that I can do to make this right again? Or perhaps we just give up altogether. Perhaps it depends on the circumstances and how overwhelming it might feel. But in that moment, we recognize that the standard answers, those things that we've told others, in this moment where we find ourselves at the end of ourselves, those standard answers just don't work anymore. They feel like platitudes. They feel like empty promises. Imagine what you would say to Mary and the other Mary sitting opposite the tomb. It's okay. This is all part of God's plan. There's no comfort in this moment. Sometimes we need to just sit for a while opposite that tomb, as Mary and the other Mary sat. And then we do what we know. Might be ordinary. Might get to the point where you have to get up and make a meal. It might just be whatever mundane thing is on the list to do. Mary and the other Mary at some point got up and went home and prepared the burial spices for the body. And we know they returned again on Easter Sunday morning. As we think of this moment of the death of Christ, and we call it Good Friday, and many people say, why do we call it Good Friday when it should be Sad Friday? And there is such a paradox in this moment. The Messiah who we greeted on Palm Sunday with hosannas and hallelujahs now lies dead. crucified. Not just dead, but shamed. Crucifixion wasn't just an infliction of pain, but it was an infliction of shame at the same time as well. It is important for us to recognize that the death of Christ is the end. The end of blame shifting as we wash our hands and say, I have no part in this. And yet we know it is for our sins that Jesus died. And the death of Jesus is the end of guilt and shame, that in his death we die. And all those things that weigh us down in this moment as we sit opposite the tomb, they die with Jesus. In this moment, as Jesus lies stone cold dead in the tomb, there is no more pain. It is the end of pain. It is the end of that darkness that oppressed Christ on the cross. It is the end of sin. It is a moment of separation from God. In these places where hope is dead, we should not feel afraid to sit a moment opposite that tomb, whatever it may be for you. And when you are ready to do what you know, not what you think is right, not what you think other people expect of you, but just that which needs to be done next. And this moment represents that sense of uncertainty between death and resurrection. It is easy for us to look back in this moment through the lens of the resurrection, knowing that there is a hope, knowing that Jesus will rise from the dead. But for Mary and the other Mary sitting there opposite the tomb, this was the end. Everything in us wants to rush on to resolve the dis-ease that we feel in this moment. In this moment, we know what that resolve is. Easter Sunday morning is coming. But for now, let us sit a moment opposite that tomb. This moment represents those realities that we live with, those uncertainties, those points of disillusion that we have. And their resolve has not yet been written. Their resolve is yet uncertain. Those situations that you face, who knows what is going to happen? And so we remember the faithfulness of these two Marys who sat opposite the sealed tomb with their grief and despair. And even though Jesus was dead, they did not abandon him. Even though their hope was buried, they continued to serve him. Joseph buried Jesus and went away. For these two Marys, as they do what they know, they don't even stop to ask the question, who will move the stone? They don't think about that practical reality. They just know this needs to be done now. And it is their faithfulness in this moment of deep despair between death and resurrection that gives us hope for our moments of despair. Hope that God's power will surprise us. But the thing about surprise is exactly that word. You don't know what it's going to be. If you knew what it was, it wouldn't be a surprise. And so, in these moments of deep despair, we continue to hope in God. not simply to meet our expectations, but to meet us in that place of despair and move us forward in the next step of our lives. As we think of that deep love that the Father has for us as we sing our next song, allow those moments of your own despair to wash over you.